While the USA is turning into a spiraling shithole, a lot of people understandably start to fantasize about a human wonderland somewhere else. But most people think it's a little too lame to idolize, say, Canada or Japan or Norway or something like that, because the difference between those Western countries and America is not radical enough. So, aesthetically, they don't find it sufficiently cool to say, why can't we be like Canada? It just sounds lame. So instead, they start to idolize China. Only the Chinese system is different enough to indicate how radical they want the change to be. I understand the aesthetic choice, but the main thing is nobody really knows how the Chinese system works. Nobody. I'm not just talking about the American amateurs browsing videos on Red Note, but even the insiders. I have a lot of acquaintances who spend their whole lives in China's public sector or even government agencies. They have no clue how policy is actually made and who's actually calling the shots. I taught college-level Chinese politics for 2 years, but honestly, it was mostly just anecdotes and fun facts. There were some theories, but not really. Like, I spent so much time teaching about the empirical patterns in China's leadership transitions, like age and career path and stuff. But then a few months later, the transitions were cancelled permanently. No wonder my teaching evaluations were so bad. And this video is the same. I'll give you not answers, but even more questions. First, I'm almost certain that there was an attempted coup recently. Most sources say it's over now, but it's hard to be sure. So President Xi has been purging the military leadership for years. You know that, right? In 2017, he downsized the Central Military Commission from 11 members to 7. The CCP's Central Military Commission is sort of like the Joint Chiefs of Staff. It's like a connection between the civilian leadership and the uniformed experts. Except that the members of the Central Military Commission are more than just advising. My understanding is that every member is supposed to have some say in policy decisions. But how exactly each vote is weighted, nobody knows. Can the generals veto the decisions by the president? No clue. So in the last couple years, the size of that commission kept shrinking because the members kept getting arrested. By the end of 2025, 3 out of 6 generals were gone. And there was no sign that Xi was gonna replace them. He just left the seats empty. The replacement is a little harder than the purge because there's a party procedure for appointing new members. So I guess President Xi just didn't bother. Or maybe he just wanted to keep the circle small. Who the heck knows? But then a week ago, it was suddenly announced that 2 of the remaining members were also arrested. Those 2 are extremely senior figures in the military. Some people say they are the only top generals with combat experience because they fought in the Sino-Vietnamese War in the 70s. So how angry and desperate Xi must have felt to remove people like those. Now there's only 1 remaining member besides Xi himself in the Central Military Commission. And that guy is not exactly a general. He has the general rank, sure, but he has mostly served as a 政委, which means a political officer. Mainly in charge of administrative and educational issues in the military. He's not an actual commander. So basically, there's no real tactical experts in the Central Military Commission anymore. Well, in a way, it's a relief, because I don't think they're gonna attack Taiwan in this shape. There are many versions of the story floating around. Some people say the purging was about corruption. But come on. There's no way. If everyone in the top circle is corrupt, what even is the point of catching them, right? Then the Wall Street Journal claimed that those guys sold intel to the US. Not likely either. I know the Wall Street Journal probably had good sources, but some Chinese sources may have misled the reporters intentionally to shape the narrative. It wouldn't be the first time. So Chinese military personnel don't even have private passports. Okay, they can travel for official businesses, but no private international traveling at all. I just don't see why they would risk their lives for a country they will never set foot on. Especially those top guys. They have all the material benefits and prestige one can dream of as long as they stay out of prison. So what's the point of playing naughty? So what was the purge really about? Most mass reshufflings in authoritarian governments happen because of something called the security dilemma. Basically, there's no mechanism to arbitrate the disagreement between ruling elites, and neither side can credibly commit not to kill the other because there's no independent judicial branch watching over them. I talked about this cowboy example before when discussing conflict between countries. So sometimes both cowboys draw their weapons because they expect the other side to shoot. So political purges follow the same logic. When Xi was still the vice president and waiting for his turn, there was a massive conspiracy among top officials to replace him. So he had this huge insecurity from day one. And he put an enormous amount of officials in jail. But the more he jailed, the more tense the security dilemma became. Everyone is at the edge of the seat waiting for the sword to drop. That feeling is not good. At some point, the exhausted senior figures were bound to do something about it. So the most believable version of the story is that the two generals, Mr. Zhang Youxia and Mr. Liu Zhenli, were planning a coup to preempt their purging. And Xi outsmarted them and arrested them instead. It was such a high-stake game, and even their family members were taken into custody. Just like what the Chinese emperors did in the old days. Chilling as hell. I thought about acquiring more information from my Chinese acquaintances, but I don't want to put them at risk just to make some stupid YouTube videos, right? What's the point? So in the short run, I think things will be quiet and Xi's position will still be safe. Even though a lot of military figures are probably not happy at him, it's still much easier for Xi to purge them than the other way around. If the generals purge the president, they will have a lot of explaining to do. Like, how do you justify the party rule if the top leader is corrupt, right? So they will have to come up with a really tight story to insulate themselves from what their top leader is accused of doing. That's hard. And if they remove him, how do they find a replacement? You can't leave the presidency vacant, right? And there's no contingency plan for a new president. So a lot of headache. But it's not nearly as hard if the president is the one doing the purging. He doesn't need that much justification. He can simply say, look, we're rooting out bad apples. Yay. And there's no rush to find replacements. Who cares if the Central Military Commission is half empty, right? Most people will just laugh it off. When you think about it, Trump and the Republican elites actually have a similar relationship. He can throw anyone under the bus, even Mike Pence, without much backlash. But not the other way around, because he's the face of the party. No Republican can criticize him without hurting the cult in general. So most likely, Xi will stay there in the foreseeable future. But because of the security dilemma, the scale of his purging will only get larger and larger over time. And the hate he gets from his comrades will also multiply. And believe me, there will be a breaking point. We just can't predict when. Okay, stay with me, please. This video will be a little long. So the drama in China is not just confined in the elite circle. The entire Chinese internet right now has this doomsday mentality. If you can read Chinese between the lines, you'll probably know what I mean. So one indicator of this mentality is the birth rates. China's population has been dropping for many years. In 2024, there was a small baby boom due to the superstition about dragon babies. So it almost looked like the population decline was slowing down. But then in 2025, wow, the number of newborns dropped by 17%. And compared to 2018, China now only had half as many newborns. For the record, I'm not one of those fertility freaks. Okay, I don't think population decline itself is a problem, but it may be an indicator of other problems. For a middle-income country to have this few babies, there must be something else going on. Unlike South Korea or Singapore, China is still far from entering the income bracket where the population drops naturally. From my limited observation, people have fewer babies not because they are abundant and have better things to do, but because they're stressful. I don't know how to measure stress level of a person, let alone a country, but the writing is on the wall. A couple years ago, during the COVID lockdown, an official was trying to lecture a guy, and he was like, think about your next generation. And the guy was like, this is our last generation. Thanks. And that quote immediately went viral, and the Chinese censors had to remove all the copies of the video. If you ask me why that line resonated so hard among young people in China, I have no idea. But I'm not surprised either. I can feel the cynical vibe on the Chinese internet, but I can't quite pinpoint where it came from. Personally, my wife and I probably wouldn't have kids. At least we wouldn't have two if we had stayed in China. Among other reasons, I think the top one is that childhood there is not happy. When you guys look at those school videos, you're like, whoa, they're so disciplined. Yeah, maybe that's the problem. Like, do you want to be so disciplined yourself? I doubt it. But for some reason, a lot of parents want to give their children what they don't want for themselves. A little hypocritical, what do you think? Anyway, I'm not entirely sure why China's birth rates dropped so dramatically. But you should know that China's economic miracle is a lot more complicated than you think. It's not entirely accompanied with hope and happiness. Sometimes the miracle is achieved exactly by turning humans into emotionless machines. So what I want to say in this video is that China is basically a big-ass puzzle, even to Chinese residents themselves. Even the president himself is probably still trying to figure shit out. Like, how many people do I need to disappear? How big should the policy-making circle be? Should I name a successor or not? What's the boundary of my power? What can I get away with? He doesn't even know for sure, really, let alone the American college kids on Red Note. So if you want to find an institutional model for America to learn from, look somewhere else. Okay, China is not what you think it is.